I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Culprit. So we thought this week we would talk about people we meet on vacation, both the book and obviously the movie that semi-recently dropped on Netflix. I know I've read more Emily Henry books than I think you have, but we definitely both agreed that people we meet on vacation, the book was better than the movie, right?
I mean, I feel like that's a broken record. I mean, can name maybe one thing that I thought, a TV show or a movie was better. Yeah, the books are always freaking better, and they change things that don't need to be changed. Sometimes I feel like, is the screenwriter or, the person, is that what, yeah, it's still the screenwriter. Uh, are they really trying to show, that they're worth their paycheck by changing just things that don't matter? I mean, I guess the argument could be if it doesn't really matter or it's not pertinent to the story, then why, it's fine that they change it. But
I mean, like, that's true, but I feel like if it's something trivial, when it's something like it's been based on a book, that like, the readers are coming into it with that background knowledge, so changing, like, things that don't matter, like the college, for instance, like, what's
hmm,
the point of that?
I agree. And it's not, yeah, you have a blueprint. You have a blueprint that was successful. I mean, I guess you can't, do page for page, though I would, I would love that if I had watched, I had read a book and absolutely everything was included. I get they can't do that, but yeah, changing the college. I mean, yeah, and the wedding is in Barcelona as opposed to Palm Springs. And of course, yeah, Barcelona is cool. In my opinion, Barcelona is, cooler, much better than Palm Springs, but yeah, and I'm gonna be really snotty and maybe, other people won't think that, but the first of all, I hadn't seen, the lead characters, I hadn't seen lead actors, I hadn't seen them in anything else, had you?
No.
Yeah, but, um, the female I'm sorry, I've forgotten the character's name.
Poppy,
There we
yes.
go. Um, the actress that was playing the part was so like Alison Brie, and it made me think I'm sure she's a wonderful person, but it made me think of the Leanne Moriarty, what is it? Apples Never Fall? Or
Yes.
yes. And again, I get that they are coming into it and they are, they are directed to, act a certain way. They are looking at the script, but Alison Brie was not. She was annoying in Apples Never Fall. And in the beginning of this, and I get, I think I liked Poppy in the book maybe a little bit more than you, but I mean, immediately she did get better as the movie progressed. But she was just really put off by her. I get that one person is, more like a rule follower and one person is more free spirited. And I get that. And you have to juxtapose that. But she was like, it was too much, you know?
No, I agree. I just really liked Alex, both, in the book, and so I think that's why I liked him a lot more than I liked Poppy, but I still liked her in the book, but yeah, like you said, in the beginning of the movie, she wasn't very likable,
Right?
and I'm not sure that's the actress's fault, that's,
No.
how the character was written.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I mean, books are always better. And you're right. I think you've read like almost all of Emily Henry's. You only have like one or two that you haven't read, right?
Yeah, and I know it's funny because the first one we read by her, we both read Beach Read, and people really liked that, and neither of us loved it, but we've liked I've liked, a lot of her other ones more, and, so and, like, People Leaving on Vacation was okay, I wouldn't say it was in my top, but definitely liked it more than Beach Read.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you really liked, what is it, Happy Place?
Yes, I know you didn't like it quite as much as I did, I really liked that one, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of felt like that. I get stretched out a little too much. Like, okay, already, when are things going to happen? Are things not going to happen until the very end? Which kind of is, what happens. But I mean, I like the ending of that one, and that was cute. And I just started a funny story, and I know you've read that one, and I'm not very far in, but I like it. So
Yeah, I really liked Funny Story, too.
oh, and then I should give a shout out because I really feel like one of the reasons that I like the books are because they're narrated by, Julie Whelan, and
We really like her.
we really like her. I know she does all the, Taylor Jenkins Reid ones, and I just I just really like her. So it's kind of like, oh, yay, somebody, that I like listening to. But anyways,
Yeah, I know. This is probably unfair. When we first started with the movie, and again, weren't loving Poppy, I'm like, Julie Whelan's voice was not this annoying.
yeah, yeah, I hear that. And I think you though are a little you give a little bit more grace to the narrators. I mean, I have a really hard time getting through an audiobook if the narrator grates on me. I'm just like, you know.
No, I hear that.
uh anyway. And I don't know if, I feel like they option a bunch of books and then you just nothing ever comes of it. So I kinda get why they did that one, but, I'd be interested if they did some of her other books and turned those into movies.
Yeah, me too.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, so I would say the movie's okay. It's worth a watch, but definitely read the book if you're gonna do one or the other.
Definitely. I definitely agree. It's kind of like the his and hers, which I know we talked about, a couple episodes ago. I feel bad if people have just not bad, but if people have just watched that series, oh, god, no, you need to read the book.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah, but this isn't quite, it's not quite that bad. I mean, you should definitely read the book, but yeah, I thought the movie was fine.
Yeah.
Alrighty then, well, let's get into it. This week, we're staying in the UK, but heading north to Kincardineshire, Scotland, a small county in the northeast bordered by the larger Aberdeenshire. As you can imagine, rural Scotland in the 1950s was conservative and religious, with activities centered around the church and traditional family values, the expected norm. So in 1954, when handsome, wealthy Maxwell Garvie, 23, met 19-year-old Sheila Watson at a young farmer's dance, no one in the small, close knit community was surprised when the two hit it off immediately. Many in town believed that Max was the area's most eligible bachelor. After all, the Garvey family was a well to do farming family, and Max had been given the reins to the farm by his father when he was only 19. Being a welly wearing, getting your hands dirty farmer wasn't for Max, though. He was a gentleman farmer, rich enough to oversee the farm and delegate the physical work to others. Though Max was known for his lavish lifestyle, he was also respected, and though his hands remained clean, he took his position and the family business seriously, always looking for ways to improve and grow the farm.
Sheila was born in October 1934. Her mother was a homemaker and her father was a stonemason on the Balmoral estate, which has been the holiday home of the British royal family since Queen Victoria and Prince Albert purchased it in 1852. The family lived for a time on the estate, and as a teen, Sheila worked as a housekeeper. Her life was quiet and conventional. Her parents were conservative and strict, and as she got older, Sheila chafed at living under their control. She got a taste of freedom when, in early 1954, the Watson family moved to the small town of Stonehaven. Though Stonehaven was a small fishing village, it was an improvement from being isolated at remote Balmoral Castle. Sheila found work as a secretary in town. Though she still lived with her parents, for the first time in her life, she had some spending money and she was able to spend it on herself, getting her hair done, buying clothes, and, to her father's anguish, attending dances. Though Sheila and Max came from different socioeconomic backgrounds, that wasn't the most glaring difference. Gender stereotypes and the sheltered way Sheila was raised compared to Max were. Max, being male and rich, was able to live the life of his choosing. By the time he met Sheila, Max had had many girlfriends and was considered quite the ladies' man. Sheila was smitten. She had never had a boyfriend, and her time spent with the opposite sex was very limited. She was swept off her feet by this attractive man who lived a devil may care life, driving expensive cars, wearing smart suits, and going to the nicest restaurants and most lively nightclubs. Max pursued Sheila with abandon. Her shy demeanor seemed to make him more insistent. They were married in a lavish ceremony on June 21st, 1955.
The newlyweds moved to Max's grand farmhouse in West Cairnbeg, which was just north of the town of Lawrence Kirk. This farmhouse was not the old clapboard White House with peeling siding and a front porch I know I picture when I think of a farmhouse.
Given all the home shows we watch, I also picture the large sink.
I so love those.
I mean, who wants to get water everywhere when they wash their dishes in a tiny sink?
Too true. The house had 5 bedrooms, a large conservatory, a walled private garden, and it was meticulously decorated to Mac's exacting standards. The Garvey home became the place to be, with Max often hosting lavish parties. While Max was busy overseeing the farm, Sheila became the epitome of a society wife and hostess. Max insisted that Sheila only dress in the most current fashions, insisting she only purchase her wardrobe from upmarket shops in London.
Because God forbid the clothes she chose embarrassed him.
I mean, he had an image to live up to.
Mm.
Max and Sheila were the it couple. If they weren't hosting a party, they were busy attending social events around town. Sheila gave birth to her first child, Wendy, in 1956, and a year later to Angela. From the outside looking in, the Garvies seemed to have it all. To their neighbors, they seemed like the perfect couple, destined for a charmed life. Well, for a while at least. Perhaps it was a result of his wealthy background, but living an ordinary life wasn't enough for Max, who seemed to be continually dissatisfied. He enjoyed the anticipation of things, talking incessantly about something like a new car to anyone who would listen. Then, when he actually got the car, he would be happy for a while, professing how great it was and showing it off, but inevitably, he would become bored having achieved what he wanted and would search for the next most enviable vehicle.
If this obsession and then boredom and dissatisfaction stayed centered on cars or other physical signs of wealth, it wouldn't have caused a problem. Max had money to burn and could have focused on buying whatever he wanted. However, everything in Max's orbit was a reflection of him. So, of course, he turned his dissatisfaction to Sheila and the kids. He was critical of how she managed the house. If she purchased something he deemed not expensive or high end enough, or if the kids dared act like the small humans they were, he would become angry. Max's tedium wasn't helped by his drinking. He had always enjoyed whiskey, but what began as 1 to 2 drinks nightly turned into 4 or 5 bottles weekly. The more Max drank, the more belligerent and discontented he became. As the provincial 1950s turned into the swinging 60s, bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones sang about change. Birth control became legal in the UK, allowing at least the perception of a more sexually open society. Attitudes regarding pornography began to change too. In 1960, Penguin Books was charged under the Obscene Publication Act for publishing an unedited edition of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Written by D.H. Lawrence in 1928, the book explores class, sexuality, including, gasp, women's sexuality. The book's protagonist, Constance Chatterley, looking for emotional and physical intimacy after her husband is unable to give her either after suffering an injury in the war, begins an affair with the educated but working class gameskeeper on their estate. Penguin was found not guilty of obscenity, and the unedited book was published, becoming a bestseller. After the trial, sexuality, which previously had been seen as taboo, became a legitimate topic for books, films, and even the theater.
Though some things changed, especially in larger cities, real societal changes were slow to have any sort of impact in smaller cities. Free love and uninhibited sex were restricted to the fringes of society. Miles from London, the epicenter of the swinging 60s, in Lawrence Kirk, very little seemed poised to change. Max was frustrated. He heard and read about the permissive society, but to his chagrin, this attitude had not reached northern Scotland. This didn't stop Max from pursuing whatever he wanted. He had affairs with both men and women. As Max became bored with his physical possessions, he also became bored with his sex life. Max subscribed to several men's magazines, which he would read over and over again. cajoling Sheila to go along with whatever he wanted to try. Sheila wasn't interested in Max's new sexual appetite, but to appease him, she went along with it. However, because Sheila wasn't a porn star, Max wasn't satisfied with her lack of enthusiasm, calling her passionless.
I'm surprised he didn't just call her frigid.
Oh, he did.
Of course he did.
Max browbeat Sheila into posing for erotic photos like he had seen in magazines. Unbeknownst to her, he showed these photos to his friends.
What a dickhead. He's just gross.
Truly. Undeterred by the lack of any changes happening in his neck of the woods, Max purchased a small home on the outskirts of Alford with the intent of creating a nudist colony. Max had become interested in naturism, which nudism was more commonly referred to in the UK, after a trip to France and a later trip to Corsica, where he visited several nudist colonies, which he insisted Sheila also attend. So, though the townsfolk, once they became aware of what Max's intentions were, and Sheila looked down on this idea, Max was steadfast. He wasn't looking to establish anything formal. He simply wanted an area where he and some select friends could have a few drinks and relax. Sans close.
That phrase is a complete oxymoron to me. I find nothing more relaxing than attempting to disappear under several layers of clothing and blankets.
I mean, I love a good blanket, but they were more of when the drinks flow, the clothes go.
That's great.
Max had a triangle of trees and thick bushes planted near the house to keep prying eyes away. The get together started with a few friends, but soon more people were invited, and it didn't take long for the gatherings to turn into more than just conversation and alcohol.
It didn't take long for locals to refer to the Alfred home as the Kinky Cottage. Sheila told friends that Max threatened her if she didn't go along with whatever he wanted. She also said he would become violent, most often when he was high on various pills, taking way more than the recommended dose of Pro Plus, a caffeine based stimulant. This overuse caused him to have frequent bouts of insomnia. But rather than backing off the caffeine pills, he started taking butobarbital as a sleep aid. This barbiturate wasn't supposed to be taken with alcohol, but Max, clearly an alcoholic, continued drinking his way through 4 or 5 bottles of whiskey weekly. And to top off this drug cocktail, he also consumed amphetamine based pep pills. Max's indulgence in whatever the hell he wanted became hyper focused on sex. The house hidden behind the trees soon lived up to its kinky moniker. The parties grew larger and the people involved more unrestrained. Partner swapping and group sex became the focus. Though Sheila initially refused to participate, Max accused her of being square and old fashioned. So, to pacify her increasingly abusive husband, she agreed. Little did he know that his pressure to have Sheila live the pleasure seeking lifestyle he demanded would eventually lead to his murder. For a time, though, Max attempted to quell his behavior when Sheila became pregnant with their third child, a son, Lloyd, who was born in 1964. Max decided to try out a new fixation. He became obsessed with learning to fly. He got his pilot's license, and because he could, he bought a 2-seater plane and formed a flying club at Fordon, which was close to the farm. Fordon had once been used as an airfield in World War II, but had fallen into disrepair and was the perfect location for Max and his new hobby. Unfortunately, Max's reckless behavior didn't change just because he could now legally fly a death machine. Max would often drink before flying, and then, if he was feeling the effects of the alcohol too much, he would take pills. Max, acting like a teenage boy, would buzz friends he saw while he was in the air, diving low over fields and gardens. Locals began referring to him as the flying farmer. Predictably, Max again grew restless. The adrenaline rush he experienced performing reckless acrobatic stunts wasn't enough to keep him content.
Away from his colorful private life, Max was an office bearer for the Scottish National Party. It was through this role that he first met and later formed a close friendship with Brian Tevendale. Brian was an attractive 22-year-old bearded barman whose family owned the Bush Hotel in St. Cyrus. Brian was born in Stonehaven in 1945, the youngest of three children. His father was well known as a former policeman who won a Distinguished Conduct Medal while serving in the Second World War. After completing school, Brian headed to Aberdeen, where he began college studying wireless operation, which would lead to a career in the Merchant Marines. Sadly, a year into his coursework, his father died and he quit school and joined the Army. However, his Army career would turn out to be short lived when he and another trainee borrowed the car of a soldier and went absent without leave for an evening of drunken joyriding. The Army, unamused, discharged Brian before he had completed his training. He returned to the Northeast and found work as a barman. Max took an immediate liking to Brian. Max, who was open to all sexual experiences, was hoping to charm Brian into his bed. Brian, though flattered by the attention, wasn't interested in having sex with Max.
Good call.
The two men were fond of excess amounts of alcohol, so they spent a lot of time together drinking, and Max would take Brian flying and often invite him to stay at the farm. Max still propositioned Brian for sex and was still turned down. Max, never content, was becoming increasingly frustrated with his frigid wife.
There it is.
Yep. And wondered if he found her a young lover, if that would reignite her interest in sex. When Max introduced Brian to Sheila, he had no idea what their relationship would become. He told a friend that his wife was boring, and he hoped that her having sex with someone else would make her less so. This was so she would end up being a better sexual partner for him, obviously.
A totally solid plan, I'd say.
I mean, what could go wrong?
One night, after consuming copious amounts of whiskey with Max, Brian went to the spare room. Just before he fell asleep, the bedroom door opened and a naked Sheila was pushed into the room. Sheila and Brian had sex that night, and Brian began spending more and more time at the farm. Most of those nights would end with Sheila in his bed. Brian became infatuated with Sheila, and Sheila was falling for Brian too. He was so much kinder and more considerate than her brash, controlling husband. Max, not one to sit idly by, was sleeping with Brian's sister, Trudy Burse. Trudy, the wife of a local police constable, was just as adventurous sexually as Max. Trudy's husband, Alfred, was a frequent guest at Max's sex parties and was open to wife swapping. This unconventional foursome, a brother and sister sleeping with a husband and wife, continued for several months until, like with all things, Max became bored. He told Sheila that it was time for them to cut Brian and Trudy loose and find some new sexual partners. But just because Max was able to look at sex transactionally, Sheila and Brian were not. When Sheila's interest in sex with Max waned, he became abusive. He canceled the sex parties and forbade Sheila from seeing Brian. But they had fallen for each other and had no intention of ending their relationship.
This infuriated Max. Though he was happy for Brian and Sheila to have sex for the period he deemed okay, he was still a domineering prick and viewed Sheila as his property. When he said things were over, he meant it. When Sheila didn't comply, he became violent. Sheila continued seeing Brian, though secretly. In late 1967, Sheila, Brian, and the children left the farm and stayed at a hotel in nearby Stonehaven. However, Max found out where she was and called the hotel and told her that if she didn't return home, he would kill all of them. Sheila returned home. She sought advice from her friends, mother, and even her clergyman, telling them that Max was unpredictable and abusive, and each of them told her to stay with her husband for the sake of the children.
Well, each and every one of them can just fuck right off.
I 1,000% agree. While this is infuriating, it's not surprising. Even though Bob Dylan sang of these times they are a changin', societal norms move at a snail's pace, and divorce was looked at as a failure, And the woman, of course, was looked at as the one to blame. Sheila sought the assistance of several solicitors about getting a divorce, but these misogynistic men refused to help her. Wait for it, because she admitted to committing adultery, which defies reason since her husband pushed her into the relationship.
But a good, God fearing wife would have done more to satisfy her husband so he wouldn't have needed to tempt her into sin.
I mean, it's always about blaming the woman.
Always.
In March of 1968, Sheila again left the farm with Brian, this time to Bradford, England. Sheila intended this to be a permanent move. However, she returned to the farm concerned about the welfare of her three children. When she returned, Max's violence escalated. He assaulted her, injuring her neck, which required her to wear a brace. Unbelievably, the doctor that treated her called Max to tell him that she had identified him as the one that caused her injury.
It's like men in positions of authority wanted to help other men murder their wives.
It's disgusting.
Despicable. After this assault, Sheila told Brian how much better life would be if Max was out of the way, and the two began plotting how they could get rid of him. In the early morning hours of May 15th, Brian, along with his friend Alan Peters, arrived at the Garvie home. Sheila ushered them in and hid them in a spare room until Max came home. It's not indicated, but it makes sense that they parked Alan's car somewhere Max wouldn't notice. He arrived home a little while later after a night of heavy drinking. Not overly belligerent this evening, just drunk off his ass. He went to bed and fell into a deep sleep. Sheila grabbed Max's .22 rifle and brought it to Brian and Alan. She stood in the hallway near her children's bedrooms to ensure that they remained in their rooms. Brian took the gun and headed to the master bedroom, with Alan following a few feet behind. Alan stopped at the doorway as Brian walked to the bed and hit Max hard with the butt of the rifle, hard enough that he didn't wake up. He then placed Sheila's pillow across Max's head to mute the sound of the bullet and shot him. The men wrapped Max in a sheet and carried his dead body outside, where they stuffed it into the boot of Alan's car. Alan, per Brian's directions, drove to nearby St. Cyrus to Lauriston Castle, which sits atop a cliff very near the North Sea. They drove around the sprawling grounds until they came upon an underground tunnel, where they unceremoniously dumped Max's body. Sheila reported Max missing on May 20th. She told the police that she last saw her husband on May 15th when he told her he was going on a trip. She didn't ask where, but assumed he would be taking his plane and going abroad. However, not having heard from him for 5 days, she was becoming concerned. The police listened and took down the information she provided, but based on Max's increasingly erratic lifestyle, they weren't too concerned.
The police did place the following description of Max in the Police Gazette, a nationally circulated publication of wanted persons, which honestly is a bit bonkers. This is what it said: spends freely, is a heavy drinker, and often consumes tranquilizers when drinking, is fond of female company, deals in pornographic material, and is an active member of nudist camps. May have gone abroad. It's too much.
Yeah.
In Max's absence, things quieted down at the Garvie farm, with Brian becoming a regular, almost permanent visitor. The couple didn't just stay out of sight at the farm, though, apparently not realizing or caring that going on dinner dates and canoodling in public with your young paramour while your husband is missing might have the townsfolk in a twitter, especially when Sheila felt comfortable broadcasting her relationship and the future she hoped to have with Brian. For all of Max's failings, absconding for days or weeks was a possibility, but to completely abandon his family and, maybe more importantly, his legacy, the family farm, was hard to fathom. Whispers became wails when no one had heard from Max in 3 months. The idea that Max may have left willingly when his plane and all his cars had not been moved, along with all his clothes still hanging in his closet at the farm, and maybe most glaringly, no money had been withdrawn from his accounts, Max was not the type of person to leave and live off the land. He had expensive tastes that would require continual funding. The Garvey children, especially the oldest Wendy, had a hard time not knowing where her father was and why he hadn't come home. Sheila asked her mother, Edith, to move into the farmhouse and help with the kids. Edith, religious, staunch, and forthright, had no problem telling her daughter that she did not approve of her relationship with Brian. For unknown reasons, or maybe to assuage a guilty conscience, she told her mother that she thought Max may be dead and that Brian could have killed him. Edith, distressed by the possibility that her son in law was dead, went to the police with the information. She also volunteered that Sheila had been asking about the tides and wondered what happened to an object that was dumped at sea. Edith told the police she believed Max could have been murdered and dumped into the North Sea. Now, I'm just saying, if you were married and your husband was abusive, I assume first your dad and I would find a way to get rid of him. I mean, duh. But if not, and you told me something happened to him, I would say good riddance, not go to the police.
I mean, thanks for that. Maybe we could have a cathartic sing along to Goodbye Earl, too.
Love that.
The police brought Sheila and Brian in for interviews. While Sheila remained composed and initially stuck to the story that Max would often disappear for extended periods of time, she acknowledged that he had never been gone this long before, but she was certain he would come home eventually. Brian, on the other hand, crumpled under police questioning. He said that Max had died in a bizarre accident involving Sheila, and his only involvement was to remove and dispose of the body. Police returned to Sheila after Brian's confession, and she changed her story, admitting that Brian and another man came to the house, pushed their way in, killed Max, and took his body away. She believed that they may have dumped his body into the sea. Brian agreed to show the police where the body was. He directed the officers to Lauriston Castle, leading them to a tunnel situated between the castle and the nearby quarry. As the group moved along the tunnel, they reached a haphazard cairn or pile of stones. Officers removed the stones, and underneath, they found a badly decomposed body. An autopsy confirmed that the body was that of Max Garvies. He had been dead for approximately 3 months. The cause of death was a combination of bludgeoning to his skull and a gunshot to his neck. Police would confirm that the gunshot had been fired from a gun belonging to Max. Sheila and Brian were arrested on August 16th and charged with murder. Brian blamed Sheila, explaining that she was the mastermind. She had told him that they could be together if Max was out of the way. Brian, infatuated as he was, admitted that he would have done anything she had wanted.
In a subsequent interview, Brian admitted that there was a third person at the house the night of Max's murder, his work friend, 20-year-old Alan Peters. He only involved him because Alan had a car and they needed to get rid of Max's body. Alan was arrested and was also charged with murder.
I feel like Alan must have been wishing he never mentioned his car to Brian.
Definitely. Alan told the police that both Brian and Sheila were involved in the murder and that he was just an innocent bystander, too afraid to speak up or do anything but watch in horror. He did admit to helping Brian dispose of the body. All three remained in jail until the trial. As you can imagine, the murder and arrest were big news in Scotland. Just 5 years earlier, in nearby Aberdeen, another husband was murdered at the hands of his wife's lover. 21-year-old Henry Burnett had an affair with 25-year-old married Margaret Guyon. When Margaret left Henry and returned to her husband Thomas, Henry broke into his brother's gun cabinet, stole a shotgun, barged into the Guyon house, and shot Thomas in the head, killing him instantly. He then took Margaret hostage and led police on a chase throughout the city. He surrendered about a half an hour after the chase began. Henry was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. He was hanged on August 15, 1963. He was the last man to be hanged in Scotland. Back to this case. The trial was scheduled for November 19th at the High Court in Aberdeen. The Scottish High Court is only used for serious criminal offenses such as rape and murder. Each case is presided over by one judge and a jury of 15. As the trial got underway, People's base human nature was on full display, with people queuing outside the courthouse with the hope of being one of the select few who would be allowed inside to hear all the titillating details. There were so many curious onlookers that the police had to place crush barriers, like the trial was a Beatles concert, to keep the throngs of people back as the three accused were accompanied to the courthouse.
Just because the time they were living in dictated a traditional conservative mindset, that didn't mean that these straight laced people didn't want all the juicy details of the Garvies' lives. The case had everything: a beautiful wife, a rich, handsome, murdered husband, a younger lover, drugs, nudity, sex, partner swapping. People were ready for all the scintillating details. Each defendant put forward a different version of what happened the night Max was murdered. All three pleaded not guilty. The prosecution argued that Sheila had persuaded Brian to murder her husband so that they could be together and she could inherit the farm, farmhouse, Max's expensive cars, and several life insurance policies. Sheila's defense centered on diminished responsibility due to the years of spousal abuse she suffered. Sheila's solicitor, Lawrence Dowdall, as was required by Scottish law, provided notice to the court that they intended to attack the character of a dead man. Lionel Daches, QC, represented Sheila in court. Sheila gave evidence for 3 days and never changed her version of events. Sheila, describing the night of May 15th, said that she and Max had gone to bed fairly early, had sex, and fallen asleep. Around 11:30 p.m., she was awoken by a man standing on her side of the bed, whispering that she needed to get up. Frightened, she got up and was led out of her bedroom into the hallway. She realized once they were in the hallway that it was Brian. He was holding a gun, and he had brought another man with him. Brian told her to be quiet and pushed her into the bathroom. She recalled being scared and that she heard terrible thumping noises coming from the bedroom. After the noises stopped, Brian opened the bathroom door and told her, "You won't have any more of him to put up with." He told her to stand outside of her children's bedrooms to make sure they didn't come out. Then, Brian and his friend wrapped Max in a bedsheet and carried him out of the house.
Sheila was adamant that she was not involved in the planning or execution of the murder, and that Brian had spontaneously decided to murder Max. She went on to testify that she was racked with guilt after Max's murder, but she didn't go to the police because she felt morally responsible for his death because she had allowed Brian to fall in love with her and that she had become emotionally invested in him and that he must have inferred that she wanted Max dead. Though consumed with guilt for what Brian had done, she felt obligated to protect him by spinning the Max went missing story. Brian didn't testify at trial. He did not have the coffers Sheila did to hire representation, instead, relying on solicitors appointed by the court. Brian's counsel highlighted his youth and infatuation as mitigating factors, suggesting he was led astray rather than a willing architect of the crime. Brian's solicitors presented the same story he had told the police when he had been questioned, with a little more detail. Brian arrived at the farmhouse after an urgent late night call from Sheila. When he arrived, Sheila was distraught and rambling. Brian went upstairs and found Max dead in bed. Sheila told him that Max had wanted to engage in sexual gunplay. Though she was hesitant, Max was insistent, and the gun accidentally went off, killing him. Sheila asked Brian to get rid of Max's body, and he agreed. This story was too much for the jury to believe, especially since the forensic evidence made it clear that Max had been repeatedly bludgeoned, fracturing his skull. To really drive the point home, and because courts are theater, the prosecution brought Max's skull in to the horror of Sheila and the jury. Many jury members found the testimony they were required to listen to distressing.
I get that they want to win the jury over, and eliciting emotion is a good way to do it, but this isn't a play that they paid to see, so I bet they were distressed.
Yeah, definitely. During Edith's testimony, one female juror was so distraught that she was excused from the courtroom. Not just for a break, she was permanently excused from the jury, and the trial continued with 14 jurors. Scottish courts don't have alternative jurors like we do in the US. Up to 3 people can be excused, and the trial will continue with 12 jurors.
Allen was also represented by court appointed counsel, but unlike Brian, he chose to give testimony. Allen's attorneys argued that he was intimidated by Brian and was simply a peripheral figure pressured into assisting in the disposal of Max's body. Allen said on the night of the murder, he and Brian drove to the farmhouse and were let in by Sheila, who handed them one of Max's guns. The two went upstairs where Brian hit Max several times with the butt of the gun before shooting him. He said that he was traumatized by witnessing the murder and felt that if he didn't comply with helping Brian dispose of the body and keep quiet, that he could be next. He further testified that a few weeks before the murder, Brian asked him if he would help get rid of the man, though he unbelievably said that he didn't realize this meant murder. Trudy Burse, Brian's sister and Max's sometimes lover, testified for the prosecution. She testified that Brian and Sheila had confessed to the murder. They told her that after Brian and Allen arrived at the house, Sheila told them to wait downstairs while she checked to make sure Max was asleep. She then came downstairs, handed Brian the gun, and all three went to the bedroom where Brian shot Max, though in this retelling, Allen was the one that beat Max. Trudy went on to say that Brian told her that he and Sheila had planned the murder. Newspapers across the UK had fastidiously followed the case, and people clamoring for one last view of the trial began queuing at 2:45 a.m. on the final day. On December 2nd, the jury delivered their verdict. The jury did not believe Brian's or Sheila's version of events. Brian was found guilty of murder by unanimous agreement. Sheila was found guilty of murder, but only by a majority vote. Both were sentenced to life in prison. If the crime had taken place just a few years earlier, the couple would have been hanged.
The case against Allen was found not proven, a verdict specific only to Scotland, which means that while the jury accepts there may be some truth to the charges, they don't believe that the prosecution has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that more evidence is required to definitively reach that conclusion. Although Sheila declared during the trial that she loved Brian, and despite widespread belief that one of Sheila's motives for planning the murder was to pursue a relationship with him without Max's interference, along with speculation from the press that Brian and Sheila would seek permission to be married, those hoping that love would win out were disappointed when 3 months after the verdict was delivered, Sheila wrote to Brian, ending any possibility of a future relationship. I have decided to have nothing more to do with you ever again. It was speculated that Sheila was advised to cut all ties with Brian if she wanted to remain in her children's lives. Sheila was paroled in 1978, and for a short period of time, she helped run her aunt's guest house in Aberdeen. In 1979, she married David McClellan. However, David was also an abuser, and the marriage ended in 1981.
I'm not excusing the murder, but she just can't catch a break.
Yeah, I know. Sheila wrote a book, Marriage to Murder, My Story, in which she again states that she did not plan Max's murder and she had no idea Brian was going to murder him. She married for the third and final time in late 1981 to Charles Mitchell. They ran a guest house in Stonehaven until his death in 1992. Sheila refused all interviews and never publicly talked about the murder. She moved into a care home in Stonehaven in 2014, having been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She died at the age of 80.
Brian was also paroled in 1978. He married and ran a bar in the village of Scone near Perthshire. In 1999, Brian agreed to an interview with the Daily Record newspaper. The bitterness and betrayal he felt, even years later, was evident. He told the paper that he didn't recall the exact words, but Sheila told him how much better their lives would be with Max out of the picture. He was initially shocked, but believed that with Max out of the way, they would be free to marry. He said he would have done anything for her. He now believed that he may have been Sheila's pawn, as there was a lot of money involved, which would have been hers if Max was dead. He was still besotted with Sheila during and after the trial and was devastated when he received her letter saying she wanted nothing to do with him. He had hoped they would end up together. Otherwise, what was the point? He said if he could go back and undo what he had done, he would. In 2003, while preparing to move to Gambia, Brian died of a heart attack at the age of 58. Alan married, had 2 children, and then divorced. He died of cancer at age 59. The Garvie children were taken in by their grandmother Edith. Sadly, she died a year later, and the children were placed with a foster family in Lanarkshire. Losing one parent to murder and another to incarceration for the murder of your other parent, plus learning all the scandalous details, had to be difficult for the kids. Wendy married and divorced young and fell into a spiral of drug and alcohol abuse. She had little contact with her mother after her release. In 2002, she gave an interview to the Scotsman newspaper where she claimed that when her mom tucked her and her siblings into bed on the evening her father was murdered, she said, "No matter what you hear, don't get up," which sure makes it seem like Sheila knew exactly what was going to happen. Angela went on to become a journalist working for a London-based magazine, and Lloyd moved back to the Garvie farmhouse with his wife and children, where he ran the farm before selling it in 2015.
A.M. Nicol, a former prosecutor and author of Sheila Garvie, Mastermind or Victim, said that the details of the Garvies' unconventional lifestyle helped convince the press, the public, and most importantly, the jury of her guilt. In that part of the world, in that period of time, people, for the most part, didn't behave like Max. Max's behavior and the view that Sheila was a willing participant went against what people believed was acceptable. He believes if Sheila was tried today, she would have been looked on more kindly with a modern jury due to her years of abuse and would have been convicted of a lesser crime, like culpable homicide. Because sex sells, papers focused on the salacious details of the Garvies' lives rather than giving weight to the marital abuse Sheila suffered. The press reported on Sheila's appearance during the trial, with comments regarding her jewelry and clothes. The pretty, well groomed woman in the dock at the High Court with her stylish, expensive clothes hardly looks like a murderer.
What a nuanced take.
Yeah, they weren't reaching for any journalistic awards.
Clearly.
Media coverage chose to ignore the allegations of abuse so they could fill their copy with all the details they could garner regarding the Garvies' hedonistic lifestyle. We are in no way condoning Max's murder. However, when you pull the curtain back and actually understand the situation Sheila was forced into and the abuse she would suffer if she dared go against Max's wishes and whims, she felt like she had no way out. She tried leaving, and each time Max threatened her and her children's lives. She lived in fear of Max's alcohol and drug fueled outbursts, trying to seek help to escape the marriage, but because of the misogynistic society she lived in, those closest to her told her to stay in the marriage. I do think that Sheila used Brian to murder Max, seeing that as her only option to escape her volatile marriage. But I also believe she had feelings for Brian. Both things can be true. Sure, the life insurance and property she would receive upon Max's death was an incentive, but I think escaping was always the goal. So, though I don't condone the actions Sheila resorted to, I can understand them. What about you?
I feel the same way. She couldn't see another way out of her situation, so she got rid of the person keeping her in it. Of course, killing Max was inexcusable, but in her mind, it was necessary.
When people that should have offered her help and support basically told her to suck it up, she really felt there was no other option.
Yeah, people are still responsible for their own actions, but when they have been repeatedly failed by those around them, you can understand why they made the choices they did.
Exactly. Next time, we'll be discussing the case of Carl Tinsler.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case for us to discuss, you can email us at culpritpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at culpritthepod on Instagram and at culpritpodcast on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you soon.